back. You're watching special coverage. This is the state funeral of the late former Deputy President David Mabuza. What you are seeing on your screens there is the cortège beginning to move from Mbombela and making its way down to Barberton. And of course, I've been, and I will repeat it, I suppose, one last time in case you're wondering why it looks slightly different from what you would have expected. The military, SANDF, telling us that they've had to be practical because of the distances that are involved between these two cities, and therefore the gun carrier which carried the casket as it made its way out of the venue at the school at Hoërskool Bergvlam, that they had to transfer the casket from that and then put it in a hearse. So that's the hearse that you are seeing being escorted by those vehicles. We will track it all the way from Mbombela to the place where the burial will take place. That's the third part of this funeral. But let's bring in some commentary with Dr. Liva Ndo Mfundo.
Good afternoon, Dr. Do. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Firstly, just your reaction. The part 2 of the funeral service has concluded. Now, soon enough, they will commence with part 3. But just your reaction to the service itself and some of the views shared about the former Deputy President.
Afternoon, Mfundo. Afternoon, Tunasizwe. I observed how South Africans would mourn one of their own. The speeches that were given about former Deputy President Mabuza, and we got to know the contribution that Mabuza has made, not only to the people of Mpumalanga, but also for the people of the other provinces. Most of the people that shared or that got a chance to speak about the former Deputy President, they spoke about so many projects and contributions that he made whilst he was in leadership positions and indeed in government in the province of Mpumalanga. And when you talk about his own background as a maths teacher, a person who was quite passionate about education, you also therefore check the infrastructural developments that took place under his leadership. And indeed, one would say this is one person who was quite passionate about education, and he had to make a difference whilst he's given the opportunity to do so. But I think there's something that has always been emphasized, which is that David Mabuza has always been a person who did not want to align himself with any faction or to be known as a supporter of a particular faction. And that is why, with the discussion that you had with Mzwai there, you spoke about how he maneuvered his way up and convincing everyone in the province of Mpumalanga that you should not be known as a province that supports this one or that one, but decisions will only be taken at conference. And everyone who spoke has always been able to try and identify specific areas where Mabuza has been able to make a difference. And that, to sum it up, is that those who had an opportunity to be led by a person like Mabuza, and specifically in Mpumalanga, they've got something to show about what Mabuza has done for them, and also the contribution that talks to party cohesion, which is something that he was quite passionate about.
Dr. Ndo, but that wasn't always the case, was it? There have been moments in the history of the ANC in this province where he wasn't seen as the unifier that everyone describes today. So I guess the question I'm asking you is, to what extent have all these tributes reckoned honestly and fully with his legacy in as far as issues of unity in the ANC are concerned, issues of governance and the governance culture, particularly when he was Premier of Mpumalanga province versus the governance culture when he was now Deputy President of the Republic?
There is an emphasis that he was able to maneuver his political moves in a manner that one would describe them as being that of a chess player. And that will talk to a person who has got a background of mathematics. Therefore, even though he would be aligned to certain factions or a particular grouping within the ANC, he would still be able to maneuver his way up and still be able to hold those that he differed with, because he wanted to be known as a person who has been a unifier. Indeed, in the political life, it is not easy not to be seen aligned to the other faction or the other one, because in any way, the survival in political life, it's about aligning yourself with a particular grouping in your political party and elsewhere. But the skill that Mabuza had is that he was able to maneuver where you thought he would be able to come out very clear and pronounce himself. He would avoid doing so, because he always avoided not to be associated with a particular faction. That is the skill that Mabuza was able to master. Also, beyond contestations in conferences, regional conferences and provincial conferences, Mabuza will still come out and say, though there were differences that took place, what should therefore happen is service delivery, which most people speak about. And of course, if you talk about the many schools that were built under his leadership, if you talk about the many houses that were built under his leadership, he was also able to balance government responsibilities and party responsibilities. You would see how the Mpumalanga province was performing, but also see how the ANC was able to build its own structures in Mpumalanga under the leadership of David Mabuza. Of course, you would talk about other instances where some of the people who were referred to as his opponents appear to have been isolated. And of course, there are people who talk about certain people who appear to have been assassinated. Those are issues that are associated with the political life. But what you must do with all these issues, you should be able to focus on the mandate and ensure that as you depart, like as departed today, there is something that people are able to point at and say, this is what Mabuza has left for us as the citizens of Mpumalanga. As the citizens.
Dr. Ndou, thank you very much. A very interesting take. That is political analyst Dr. Ndou there in conversation with us. But we continue this conversation here in studio. We're still with politics editor Mzwandile Mbeje. We're also joined by senior reporter for politics Samkele Maseko. Both of you have heard that conversation with Dr. Ndou there. The question that Thula Sizwe had posed was around whether there was a full account of the very complex political legacy of the late Didi Mabuza, whether from numerous speakers that spoke today or over the course of the week when they've been mourning, that has there been that reckoning that when we talk of the complexity, we don't just almost speak on the surface, but talk of the difficult moments, the 2015 that have been highlighted with the SACP. There were gunshots, there were fistfights at Kanyamazane. There was quite a lot, and the issues at play at the time were around corruption, political killings. A lot had been said at the time. We had Save ANC, where even with that grouping led by Peter Nyoni, also had serious differences with the leadership of David Mabuza, that in as much as today we speak of unity, has there been a great acknowledgement of the complexities of this political legacy?
I would think there's been a great acknowledgement of the complex political legacy that Didi Mabuza holds, particularly if you note during that period of 2015 in Kanyamazane of political violence between the ANC and the South African Communist Party, the ANC's National Executive Committee deployed then Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa to come and work in building unity of the ANC and the SACP within this particular province. There is a line in the eulogy of the president where he speaks about, you held the province day in and night on your shoulders, on the unity project of Mpumalanga. Yes, he has not always been a unifying figure in the politics of Mpumalanga, but his reckoning moment in some of the discussions I had with him I would say that period in which Cyril Ramaphosa came to work in the province in building that unity of the ANC and the SACP, I learned diplomatic mastery from him and the issue of give and take in politics, and that without a united alliance, the ANC is in tatters, particularly noting the ideological and intellectual input that the SACP brings in as the vanguard of the working class towards the African National Congress. You remember the frictious relationship between Bonagele Machuba, the then provincial secretary of the South African Communist Party, and David Mabuza. But later on, you would see the re-emergence of Bonagele Machuba in the government of David Mabuza as he was about to leave the province, which saw the unity of the ANC and the South African Communist Party within the province. But it further saw a fracturing relationship between Vusi Shongwe, who was the then MEC of Community Safety within the province, who saw himself as the incoming premier of the province, who ultimately went on to go to former President Zuma at the time to say, I'm ready to lead the province now. But Jacob Zuma being loyal to being loyal to David Mabuza, hence he went back to David Mabuza to say, you need to come back into the province. Amakundwane ayakanga ikataliko, as Didi would say, and that would ultimately see the re-emergence of Didi, despite him being sick, coming back into the province and going away once again until he came back ultimately fit. And you then saw the political demise of Vusi Shongwe gradually, not instantly, gradually, because if you remember the visuals of the January 8 statement that took place at the Mbombela Stadium after the reuniting of Ronald Lamula and David Mabuza, Desmond Moela, Puluso Mbatsane, Tim Mashele, Sasekane Manzini, Pat Ngomane, Spiwe Mashele, they were all pushed to the curbs on the sidelines. David Mabuza brought back his prodigal son, Ronald Lamula, who was presiding over his funeral today, and paraded him in the stadium, which shows that multifaceted personality that Regina Mahole spoke about, that he will kick you out of the inner circle, then bring you back later. But he was a multifaceted personality, and we can even describe him as a political enigma.
All right, so you're also seeing to the right of your screen there the procession making its way on the, much of the route is the R40. Of course, there's the R38. It will turn at some point. The majestic mountains, you and I call it Dinzabatasem Jindini. Dinzabatasem Jindini, Umjindi Mountains. They're deep in terms of, the history, the archaeology, and the heritage of the Swazi people, Maswati, who mainly dominate in this area. So, I mean, it just tells you the roots and settings from whence David Mabuza, not came from, but where he will be laid to rest. So it's a magnificent landscape that is being revealed as you see those visuals playing themselves out. But earlier on, there was the president delivering the eulogy, and Mfundo. Lots that he touched upon about his working relationship with the late former deputy president. Yeah,
indeed. Even going on to say that he was a dependable and excellent deputy president, something that was quite refreshing to hear, because, I mean, he only got one term, so one would have wanted to know that how was he as your deputy president, because this was your second in command, really your help. And for him to have closed it off and said he was an excellent deputy president, I think maybe for the family would have been quite heartwarming to know that indeed he was what many have said to have always been a good help to his seniors.
Yeah. In fact, I'm told we do have a clip before we jump onto that conversation with Mzwai and Samgele. So let's take that clip and play it of the president earlier on paying tribute to his former deputy president.
He was not a man for pomp and ceremony of high office. He preferred to be on the ground with the masses of our people, listening to their concerns and working to improve their lives. Over the past days, we have heard from a number of young people of Mpumalanga who have described him as a father of the community, who helped to bring development to many rural parts of this province. He was a man of sharp intellect. He was a person who was very pragmatic, and he had a deep resolve in what he did. To some, he was the cat with 9 lives, resilient in the face of political storms. I used to think that it was just a nickname, that he was called a cat. But in some conversations, he would refer to himself as uyangazi mina ngiyikati. But to many in his home province and beyond, he was a source of support, as we have heard, a provider of opportunities, and a champion for rural development and education.
A man of sharp excellence, and one that wasn't really keen or fascinated by the pomp and ceremony, Mzwai. That's what we heard today. But many, it seemed, in society had been so obsessed with his silence. They even asked, where is he? They always spoke of his absence. But we have heard speaker after speaker speak of a man who actually was quiet, and to some might seem absent, but he was very much present in every single political debate, but quiet.
Yes, I guess characters like himself do like to work in the background, and they want that work that is being done there to be the one that speaks volumes. Who could have thought that in such a short space of time he would emerge as Deputy President? Because at the time you had other names being bandied about, but when that conference was about to come, then you saw his workings. So he may not have been loud about it, but what he was doing underground or in the background was exactly what he wanted to achieve. So you would characterize him as someone who was very committed to what he was doing, but at the end of the day, he knew he also had to be the beneficiary thereof.
So Mzwai, I don't mind saying this because I honestly hold the view, rightly or wrongly, but it is my view, that David Mabuza was the perfect deputy president. The last thing you want is the deputy president attempting to outshine the incumbent. That sows division, sows chaos. Very early on, Samgele, I don't know if you remember, I think we were in Kimberley for that January 8 event, where there was a bit of a disconnect between what he had said on load shedding and ESCOM. Quickly, the moment that came up, he retreated so fast that he said what the president said. And basically, no matter how much we tried, and you and I know, during the January 8 week, there's enough opportunity for contradictions to arise.
Yeah.
But once he realized that what I'm saying contradicts the president, he actually said the words, "You'll never get me to contradict my president." So that's the one thing. Not trying to contradict the president, not trying to outshine him, but can be assigned all of these tasks that, you know, the president assigns to a deputy president.
Indeed, I remember we had posed that question when we arrived in Kimberley for that particular January 8 statement. I remember I got a call, say, where's the SABC? Where are you guys? Zwandile Mbeje was it was his first assignment as the political editor, my first assignment, having just joined the SABC. It was in 2020, January 2020, Kimberley. Then Mzwai said, Samgele, go. You know this man, go. Colleagues had been chasing him the whole day. Immediately when we got there, I asked him the question, was the president misled on sabotage, on stage 6 load shedding, that he had to abruptly cut his trip from Egypt and come back into the country? David Mabuza shot out and said, yes, the president was misled by the minister, the late Minister of Public Enterprise, Pravin Gordhan. At the time, the late Jabu Mabuza was the board chair at ESCOM. A day later, I remember that night there were a frictious number of calls to Mzwandile Mbeje, to everyone, trying to quell the tensions that were seemingly simmering between the president and the deputy president's office. Later on, during that particular January 8, Jabu Mabuza resigned as the board chair of ESCOM, ultimately taking the fall for quote unquote, misleading the president on this particular issue of January 8th. But ever since then, there was no discord or disjuncture between the president and the deputy president. One that comes to mind is at the funeral of his brother 2 years ago, when he ultimately announced that he would be stepping down as the deputy president of the country because he could see the one elected by conference was making his moves in his corner to come in. He ultimately said that he hopes that those who are now coming in as the deputy president will allow, will respect, will protect, and will enable the president to lead the country into prosperity. And those are some of the words that echoed in the eulogy of the president, and it gave you a sense of a deep-rooted relationship between the two. One issue that also comes to mind is there's a video I recently posted of the interaction of the president of David Mabuza and President Ramaphosa at the funeral of Tito Mboweni. David Mabuza had been out in the public domain for quite some time. Nobody knew where he was, what he was doing. Then he resurfaced at the burial of Tito Mboweni. He said, "You no longer call me Angsagwas." President Ramaphosa said, "You disappeared." But to hear the president today say that a few weeks ago he had a call with David Mabuza, they engaged on politics and particularly on issues around the national dialogue, it shows you that this is a man who sat back, moved away, went to focus on his health, but still remained engaged in the politics of the ANC. What they don't say in the public domain, a week or two before he went to Russia, he called Mandla Ndlovu. Mandla Ndlovu spoke about it and said David Mabuza expressed a desire for them to be seen in public together in Mpumalanga. Those were the start of the discussions of reuniting, to say, I'm out in the cold politically, I've not been well, but I can still be a reservoir of knowledge and assistance in the rebuilding of the ANC in Mpumalanga, noting that his own allies had left the ANC, Skemekeme, Ngraingwenya, and went to other political formations. So his work ethic and his experience would help to try and rebuild the ANC in Yomkondo areas and other parts of this particular region of Nkangal, of Ehlanzeni, where the ANC has lost a tremendous number of votes within this particular area, which used to be two particular regions, Buhlabelo and Ehlanzeni at the time, until Buhlabelo was dissolved to form this particular one region of Ehlanzeni. So it just tells you that he was a multifaceted personality, was able to forgive, to move on. What I also remember, in the ANC 2022 conference, there was a period in which he left the stage for about 30 minutes. He called ANC leaders and said, I'm contesting as president. Do I have your support, Zweli Mkhize? Do I have your support, Paul Mashatile, Lindiwe Sisulu, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma? They all said no. He went back on stage and declined nomination.
So that's the misleading part, eh? that Kweda Matasha was talking about.
So at least now we hear from Samkele that indeed there was that conversation 30 minutes before where he asked if they would endorse him, and they didn't. And quite interesting that you touch on Ngraingwenya, that they would have left the ANC, but most certainly quite present at the family home. I'm sure you probably got even an opportunity to interact with Ngraingwenya, even though he's left the ANC. But before we touch on some of those who have been coming to the home and have shown support, even having fallen out with the late Deputy President, but came to support, before we go there, let's take you back now to Barberton. I believe Tumelo Mashoho is standing by to share with us the very latest. Tumelo, it's over to you.
Well, indeed, Mfundo, even Ngraingwenya is already inside the family farm here in Barberton. Also, the Premier just arrived. He also went in, and the family spokesperson, Desmond Moela, they've also just arrived and went inside. More of these dignitaries are starting to arrive as the body is getting closer and closer to Barberton. You remember now that the bodies are currently now in a hearse. It will be transported back into the gun carrier on the R40, just about 1.3 kilometers from the house, and then a parade will take place leading to the family home right here, where the third part of this funeral will take place, where now the the flag, the family will receive the flag from the military. The military rather will give the flag to the Deputy President Paul Mashatile, and Paul Mashatile will hand over that flag, the national flag to the Mabuza family at any moment now. But more of these dignitaries are arriving. I'm going to step out of shot just to give you the activities that is happening outside here. Everyone is ready now for the start of that process that is going to take place here. Already the road on the R30 the road on the R38 rather, it will be closed at some point to allow the family and that process to take place, to come into, for the cortege to come into the family home. They will use this gate where we are to go inside, and that's where the third part of this funeral service will take place inside. We have not get a confirmation yet if the media will be allowed inside, but we know a select number of people will only be allowed inside this family home. Mfundo.
That's Tumela Machocho there out in Barberton, just as we are continuing to track that cortege making its way towards the final burial ground out in Barberton. And I think, Tumelo, among the people that Tumelo was mentioning who is already there is the provincial chairperson, Mandla Ndlovu, among the people who are already there.